The gravy hit my arm before I heard the laughter, boiling, brown, streaking down my skin like a lit match dragged slow from elbow to wrist. I gasped. Derek's hand was still holding the tilted gravy boat, his grin wide, his eyes bright with something I'd spent 28 years pretending wasn't there. The table erupted not in horror, but in howling amusement. My father slapped the table. My mother covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. My brother took a bow, and I stood in my parents' dining room on Thanksgiving evening, blistering, while 16 people decided it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. That's how it starts in my memory, the heat, the laughter, and the long silence inside my own chest where a scream should have been. But the real story began years before that dinner, and it wouldn't end until a doctor in a Portland emergency room looked at my arm under fluorescent light and said 5 words that cracked my entire life wide open. I need to be honest about something first. For most of my childhood, I didn't know what was happening to me had a name. I thought it was just family. I thought it was just Derek. My brother was born 3 years before me, and by the time I arrived, the kingdom was already his. Derek was the firstborn, the son my father dreamed of, the kid who threw a football before he could read. He had this energy, restless, magnetic, dangerous, and my parents orbited around it the way people orbit a bonfire. Close enough to feel warm, never close enough to get burned. That was my job. I learned the rules early. Derek's mood came first. If he was happy, the house was happy. If he wasn't, you found the nearest corner and disappeared into it. My mother, Sandra, had a phrase she repeated like a prayer: "Don't poke the bear." She said it with a nervous laugh, as though my brother's rage was whether natural, unavoidable, no one's fault. My father, Jim, took a different approach. He simply pretended nothing was wrong. If Derek shoved me off the porch swing, Dad called it roughhousing. If Derek bent my fingers back until I cried, Dad said I needed to toughen up. There was always an explanation. There was never an apology. The early stuff was small enough to dismiss. A shove here, a pinch there, a glass of juice knocked accidentally into my lap at a restaurant. Once, when I was 9, Derek held my head under the bathwater for what felt like a full minute. When I came up coughing and sobbing, he told our mother I'd been playing a game and got water up my nose. She believed him without blinking. She always did. By middle school, I'd gotten good at reading his patterns. His cruelty had a rhythm days of charm followed by sudden, sharp violence disguised as jokes. He'd trip me in front of his friends and say I was clumsy. He'd throw things near my head and say I overreacted. One winter, he pushed me down the back porch steps onto the frozen driveway and told my parents I slipped on ice. I fractured my wrist. My mother wrapped it in a bandage from the medicine cabinet and told me to stop crying because I was embarrassing myself. I was 13 years old, and I didn't see a doctor for that fracture until years later, when an X-ray for something else revealed it had healed crooked. The thing about growing up like this is that you stop trusting your own experience. When the people who are supposed to protect you keep rewriting what happened, you begin to wonder if maybe your version is wrong. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you do bruise easily. Maybe you did slip. Maybe the bathwater wasn't that deep. Maybe Derek's hand on the back of your head was just playing around. You twist yourself into shapes that accommodate the lie because the truth is too lonely to hold by yourself. I left for college at 18 and felt, for the first time, what it was like to live in a space where no one's laughter made me flinch. I studied education at Portland State, became a 4th-grade teacher, and built a life that was small but entirely mine. A 1-bedroom apartment in the Hawthorne district, a used Subaru, a handful of friends who didn't require me to shrink. I went home for holidays because that's what you do. You show up, you eat the turkey, you survive. But each visit left a residue I couldn't scrub off, a tightness in my chest that lingered for days, a flinch reflex that reactivated the moment I pulled into my parents' driveway in Lake Oswego. Derek, meanwhile, had become everything my parents hoped. Licensed realtor, new construction specialist. His face on bus bench ads around the west side, that big, easy grin that strangers found charming and I found terrifying. He'd married young, divorced fast, and somehow came out of it looking like the victim. He had a talent for that, reshaping events until he stood in the center looking wounded. My parents funded his agency's startup costs. My mother called him her miracle boy. My father golfed with his clients. And me, I was the quiet daughter who taught other people's children. Reliable, unremarkable, easily overlooked. which is why Thanksgiving that year was supposed to be routine. Show up, smile, leave early. I arrived at 4. The house smelled like roasted rosemary and wine. My mother hugged me at the door, the kind of hug that looks right from the outside but applies no real pressure. Derek was already holding court in the kitchen, carving the turkey with a big knife and a bigger audience. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the full production. He spotted me and grinned. Mila, my favorite little sister. I was his only sister. That joke never landed, and he never stopped making it. Dinner was fine for the first 40 minutes. I sat at the far end of the table, next to my cousin Priya, who asked about my students, and actually listened to my answers. I was starting to relax a mistake I'd been making my whole life when Derek stood to refill the gravy boat. He walked behind my chair. I felt his presence before I saw him. That old radar, the one I'd developed as a child, flared hot. Then his arms swung wide, theatrical, deliberate, and the gravy boat tilted. Boiling liquid splashed across my forearm and the side of my wrist. I screamed. The table went quiet for half a second. Then Derek laughed. A big, booming laugh that told everyone else how to react. "Oh my God, Mila, I'm so sorry. I tripped. Dad, your floors are a hazard." He was already performing, already scripting the narrative. My father chuckled. My mother rushed over, not to me but to blot the tablecloth. An aunt handed me a napkin. Priya looked at me with something I couldn't name. And Derek leaned down close to my ear, still smiling, and whispered something only I could hear. "You always make things so dramatic." My arm was screaming. The skin had gone from white to angry red in seconds, and I could see the edges of blistering already starting to form. But I did what I always did. I pressed the napkin against it, said I was fine, and excused myself to the bathroom, where I ran cold water over my arm and cried so quietly that no one would hear. That night, I drove home with my arm wrapped in a damp kitchen towel. It throbbed the entire way. I told myself it would be better by morning. It wasn't. By 8 a.m., the blisters had swollen fat and tight, and the skin around them was a deep, furious pink that radiated heat like a stovetop. I'd barely slept. Every position sent fresh waves of pain up my arm. I knew I should go to the emergency room, but I could already hear the chorus in my head. Sandra's voice, Jim's voice, Derek's voice telling me I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Gravy isn't that hot. You probably bumped the stove and forgot. You bruise easily, Mila. You always have." I went anyway. Alone, because asking for help felt like asking for permission to feel pain, and I'd stopped doing that a long time ago. Portland Memorial's ER was half empty the morning after Thanksgiving. A nurse named Denise checked me in, noting the burn and asking gentle, routine questions. "How did it happen? When? Have you treated it at home?" I answered plainly. "My brother spilled gravy on me at dinner." She didn't react, just typed and guided me to an exam room. The doctor arrived 15 minutes later. Dr. Kapoor, mid-40s, calm eyes, a quiet authority that immediately made the room feel less clinical. She examined the burn carefully, pressing the edges with gloved fingers, noting the depth and pattern. "This is a second-degree burn," she said. "The pattern is consistent with a poured liquid." She paused, looking at me. Poured, not splashed. I didn't know what to say to that. She didn't push. Instead, she asked me to roll up my sleeve further so she could treat the full area, and that's when everything changed. I rolled the fabric to my elbow, exposing the underside of my forearm. Dr. Kapoor stopped. She leaned in. Her gloved fingertip traced a faded, whitish line of scar tissue I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was visible. "When did you get this?" she asked. "I don't." I hesitated. I burned myself on a panhandle. Years ago. She looked at me with an expression I'd never received from anyone in my family. Careful, measured belief. "Mila, would you mind if I examined your arms and upper body more thoroughly?" Something in her voice made my throat tighten. I nodded. What followed was the quietest 15 minutes of my life. Dr. Kapoor documented 4 separate scars on my arms and torso, 2 burns and 2 marks, consistent with blunt impact. She asked about each one. I gave the explanations I'd been given. The panhandle, the ice on the porch, a fall during a hike, a door I walked into. Each story left my mouth sounding thinner than it had in my memory. She sat down on the stool across from me and folded her hands. "Mila, I'm going to be straightforward with you. The injuries I'm seeing old and new form a pattern, and as a mandated reporter, I'm required to contact law enforcement when I see something like this." The room tilted. "Law enforcement? I'm not diagnosing what happened to you," she said gently, "but I'm seeing repeated injuries over a long period, and the new burn has characteristics that concern me. I want to make sure you're safe. That's my only priority right now." She picked up the phone on the wall. I watched her dial. I watched her speak in low, precise sentences. And I sat there in a paper gown with a throbbing arm and a lifetime of suppressed memories, feeling for the first time like someone was looking at the full picture instead of the single frame my family kept showing. A detective arrived within the hour. Detective Marsh, early 50s, short gray hair, a calm that matched Dr. Kapoor's but carried a different weight. She pulled a chair close, positioned herself at my eye level, and opened a slim notebook. "Mila, I'm not here to pressure you," she began. "I'm here because Dr. Kapoor flagged a concern, and I'd like to hear your perspective. Can you walk me through what happened last night?" I told her about the gravy. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked, "Has your brother done anything like this before?" The question cracked something open, not a dam breaking, but a slow leak, memory after memory seeping through the gap. The bathwater, the porch steps, the fractured wrist no one took me to the doctor for. The accidents that always happened when Derek was within arm's reach. I spoke for 20 minutes without stopping, and with each sentence, the stories I'd swallowed for decades surfaced raw and undeniable. Detective Marsh wrote steadily. When I finished, she looked up. "Mila, has anyone in your family ever discouraged you from seeking medical treatment after one of these incidents?" "Every time," I said. The words came out without thought, bypassing every filter I'd built. My mother always said I didn't need a doctor, that I bruised easily, that I was making it worse by overreacting. She nodded slowly, as if the answer confirmed something she already suspected. "We're going to look into this. I'll need to review your medical records, and I'll be requesting footage from last night. Your parents' home, does it have exterior cameras?" "My father has a Ring doorbell," I said, "front and back." "Good. We'll subpoena that footage." She stood, then paused. "Mila, one more thing. Do you feel safe going home?" I looked at her. The question landed differently than any question anyone had ever asked me. Not, "Are you okay?" which expects a yes. Not, "Why are you crying?" which expects an apology. But, "Do you feel safe?" which expects the truth. "I don't know," I said. And for the first time, that uncertainty didn't feel like weakness. It felt like the beginning of honesty. I went home with my arm bandaged and a card with Detective Marsh's direct number. The apartment that had always felt small now felt like the only place in the world where no one could reach me. I locked the door, sat on my couch, and cried not from pain, but from the strange, disorienting relief of being believed. 2 days passed. Priya called on Saturday. She'd heard from her mother that I'd gone to the ER, and unlike the rest of the family, she didn't call to tell me I was overreacting. "Mila, I saw what happened," she said. "He didn't trip. I was watching him. He aimed." My chest tightened. "You saw it?" "I've been seeing it for years," she whispered. "I just didn't know what to do. I'm sorry." I asked if she'd be willing to talk to Detective Marsh. She said yes without hesitating. On Monday, Marsh called with an update that made my hands go cold. "We reviewed the Ring footage," she said. "Both cameras captured the driveway and the front entrance. But more importantly, your father's indoor camera in the living room, did you know about that one?" I didn't. "It has a wide angle that catches part of the dining room. Mila, the footage clearly shows your brother walking behind your chair, pausing, adjusting his grip on the gravy boat, and pouring the liquid onto your arm. There is no trip. There is no stumble. It was deliberate. I couldn't breathe." "There's more," she continued. "We obtained a warrant for your brother's phone based on the footage and your testimony. We found a group text between Derek and your parents, a chat you were excluded from going back 3 years. 3 years. The same period Dr. Kapoor had estimated for the oldest visible scars. In those messages, there are conversations about you that are concerning. Your brother repeatedly refers to incidents involving you, and your parents respond with strategies to minimize or redirect. There are messages from your mother coaching Derek on what to say if you ever brought up past injuries. And there's a thread from 2 weeks before Thanksgiving where your brother wrote, and I'm reading this directly. "She's been too comfortable lately. Thanksgiving is perfect. Big crowd. Easy cover. The room dissolved around the edges. I gripped the phone so hard my bandaged arm throbbed. "Mila, we're moving forward with charges. Assault in the second degree for the Thanksgiving incident, and we're building a case for additional counts based on the historical pattern. We're also looking at your parents' involvement." "My parents?" My voice cracked. "Conspiracy to conceal. Your mother's messages make it clear she was aware of ongoing harm and actively worked to prevent you from seeking medical attention or reporting it. That carries its own set of legal consequences." I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after that call. Not crying, not thinking, just sitting with the enormity of what had been happening in the background of my life while I was busy believing I was loved. The arrest happened on a Wednesday evening. Detective Marsh coordinated it quietly. Derek was taken into custody at his real estate office in front of his assistant and 2 clients. No scene, no drama, just handcuffs and a Miranda warning under the fluorescent lights of a strip mall office suite. For a man who spent his whole life performing, the audience was brutally small. My parents were served separately. My father was at home, my mother was at the grocery store. Neither resisted, but Marsh told me later that Sandra cried not for me, but because the neighbors might see the patrol car. The fallout in my extended family was immediate and sharp. My uncle, Sandra's brother, called me to say I was destroying the family. An aunt sent a long email comparing me to Judas. Cousins who'd sat at that same Thanksgiving table and laughed while I burned suddenly had nothing to say, but Priya stayed. And my grandmother on my father's side, a woman who'd been quietly sidelined by the family for years, called me one evening and said something I'll never forget. "I watched your father become his father. I couldn't stop it." "But you stopped it, Mila. You stopped the wheel." The legal process moved slowly but steadily. Derek was charged with assault in the second degree and menacing. His attorney pushed for a plea, but the prosecutor, a woman named Dana Whitfield who'd handled domestic violence cases for 15 years, argued for trial based on the pattern of behavior and the premeditated messages. The judge agreed. The trial lasted 4 days. Priya testified. Dr. Kapoor testified. Detective Marsh presented the ring footage in open court, the silent, damning seconds of my brother pausing, adjusting, and pouring. The group chat messages were read into the record. My mother's words, typed casually over years, were projected onto a screen for strangers to see. "Just tell her she bruises easily. She won't go to the doctor, she never does. Make sure she doesn't talk to anyone outside the family." Derek's defense argued it was a family dynamic, not a crime. A dysfunction, not a conspiracy. The jury didn't buy it. He was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, with no possibility of early release for the first 2. His real estate license was suspended pending the conviction. The bus bench ads came down within a week. My parents each pleaded no contest to charges of conspiracy and criminal misprision failure to report known abuse. My mother received 18 months of supervised probation and 200 hours of community service. My father received the same, plus mandatory counseling. Neither has contacted me since the sentencing. I don't expect them to. Some silences are final, and I've made peace with that. The hardest part wasn't the trial or the testimony or the headlines that ran briefly in the local section of the Oregonian. The hardest part was sitting in my apartment afterward, in the quiet, and learning how to live without the constant low hum of fear I didn't even know I'd been carrying. My body had to relearn that a knock on the door wasn't a threat. That laughter in the hallway wasn't aimed at me, that I could stand in my own kitchen and reach for a pot without flinching. I started therapy 3 weeks after the verdict. My therapist, Claire, told me something in our second session that rewired the way I understood my childhood. She said, "Mila, you didn't fail to recognize the abuse. You were trained not to. There's a difference." That sentence lifted something off my chest that I'd been pressing down for 28 years. 6 months later, I used a small inheritance from my grandmother to lease a space on Division Street. I turned it into a resource center, not a shelter, but a place where people who grew up in families like mine could come and talk, find legal guidance, get connected with therapists who understood what it meant to be harmed by the people who were supposed to love you the most. I named it the Clear Room, because clarity was the thing I was denied the longest. The day we opened, Priya helped me hang the sign. She looked at me and said, "You know, I always thought you were the strongest person in that family, but I was wrong. You weren't strong. You were surviving. Now you're actually living. I think about Derek sometimes. Not with anger, not anymore, but with a strange, distant sadness for the brother I might have had, if someone had intervened sooner. I think about my mother's hands blotting the tablecloth instead of reaching for my arm. I think about my father's laughter, reflexive and hollow, filling the space where protection should have been. But mostly, I think about the morning in the ER. Dr. Kapoor's gloved hand tracing the scar I'd stopped seeing. Her voice, quiet and certain, telling me that what had happened to me mattered, that I deserved to be examined, documented, and believed. Not because I was broken, but because I was worth the truth. People sometimes say family loyalty means enduring anything. I used to believe that. I used to wear my silence like proof of love, as if swallowing pain was the same thing as being strong. But real loyalty doesn't ask you to bleed quietly. Real love doesn't rehearse excuses. And strength, the kind that actually counts, sometimes looks like a woman in a paper gown, saying yes to a detective's questions while her whole world rearranges. If you've carried something like this, if you've spent years wondering whether the hurt was real, or whether you just bruise easily, I want you to know, you're not dramatic. You're not too sensitive. And the voice inside you that whispers something is wrong is not your enemy. It's the truest thing you have. Share your story in the comments if you're ready, and if you're not, that's okay too. Sometimes the bravest thing is just knowing the truth, even if you're the only one who holds it for a while. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. You're not alone. You never were.